In this episode of The Cosmic Sponge, we talk about the cryptid bash that took place in Morgantown, West Virginia, discuss the first interview with Chad Underwood, the pilot who recorded the 2004 Nimitz video of the Tic Tac UFO. Then we look into the renewed interest in a UFO case from 1994, which occurred in the mysterious land of Ottawa. Meanwhile, to the south, Bigfoot moves into Stephen Hawk's neck of the woods, possibly looking for a spot on the show. Finally, we look into a UFO encounter that lasted almost 45 minutes, culminating in an out-of-this-world injury. Grab some beef jerky and a bottle of Yowie juice. We're headed to the Great White North, where flying saucers light people on fire. Stick around. This episode's a hot one.
Welcome to Cosmic Sponge, the show where we talk about UFOs and other weird wonders of the world. I'm Stephen Hawk.
And I'm Jimmy Cope.
Tonight, you know what? I just realized, listening to a few of our podcasts, I think every time I say, we have a very special episode for you tonight.
If all of them are special, none of them are.
Yeah, what should I say? We have an extraordinary episode for you.
Is it really?
I don't think it's extraordinary.
We have a very Polish episode for you tonight.
We have a very Canadian episode for you tonight.
Oh, that's true, because he immigrated, but we'll get to that later.
We'll get to that later. Tonight, we are going to be looking at the Falcon Lake UFO incident, and this one is one of those incidents that I have always known about since I was a kid. I have found very intriguing, a case where a man was injured by a UFO and
allegedly
had physical traces of it. Very, very unusual case. Very unusual. Nothing else out there like it. But first, Jimmy, what have you been up to, my man?
Well, I want to push off the news for a minute and talk a little bit about this cryptid bash that went on downtown Morgantown, West Virginia, home of West Virginia University. Downtown next to the Blue Moose Coffee Shop, a couple of stores down.
The Blue Moose?
Blue Moose. It's a great...
Not anywhere close to the Red Moose?
There is no Red Moose. There's only the blue one. And it's...
They go out of business again?
Again? They went out of business so fast I didn't even realize they were open. Blue Moose is an awesome coffee shop. Been around for a long time downtown. And there was a cryptid bash put on by the Moth Boys, which is another podcast dealing with cryptids. You guys should go check them out. They're really pretty good.
Are you giving them a shout out, Jimmy?
I am. I listened to a couple of their episodes. I talked to the guy, one of the guys, Tim, I think was it his name, Tim? I can't remember. So many people today, it's, and I'm not great with the memory being old and all. Let's be honest. It's always been bad. But met quite a few guys down there. The Moth Boys were a group, I think, of 3 friends who have this podcast they do. It's really good. There was a couple of other people there who do podcasts that I met, and we'll talk about those, I'm sure, in the future. I can't remember the names of all of them. There's just so many of them. But I did get you something, and I know this is an audio format, but I'm going to give you...
Oh, sweet, man. That is very cool. And listeners, it is a drawing, what do you call that? Like a poster of Bigfoot holding a crystal ball or some type of glowing blue orb. And it looks like the owl from Fly By Night, the Rush album, is on his shoulder.
Yeah, this is actually the guy. This is the guy for the other podcast. His name's Timothy Rainier, maybe.
Oh, he drew that?
Yeah, this is his, and he signed it. He signed it for you and everything, man.
Oh, very nice. Thank you.
So,
I appreciate that, man. Will we ever go to a video format, which we plan to do in the future, we will definitely have those around. Nice.
That's for me.
Very nice.
And also for me, from Seth.
Oh, you got a movie poster.
Yeah, for the new movie that just came out on Thursday. It's the On the Trail of UFOs, Dark Sky. That came out on Tuesday, and that would have been Tuesday. That's this past week would have been like, is it the 3rd?
August 2nd.
August 2nd?
No, August 3rd.
August 3rd is when it came out.
Yeah, we run about 2 weeks behind. Jimmy went to this cryptid bash. He was telling me about it. It's in his hometown. And Seth Breedlove is the filmmaker. Makes a lot of documentaries about UFOs, Flatwoods Monster, Momo. UFOs is what this latest movie's about. his company's called Small Town Monsters.
Yep.
And so if you're interested in seeing some of these, they're really well made. If you have Amazon Prime, just type in Small Town Monsters. Often there are plenty on there for free, and they kind of go through a rotation. I like them. I think they're well done.
Oh, for sure. I've watched the UFO On the Trail of UFOs show that they did.
Mm-hmm.
So that's got some really good cases in there, particularly.
It sure does. And they go around the country, and they definitely interview plenty of witnesses. You also told me our former guest, Les Odell, was there.
Oh, Les was there.
And paranormal investigator.
Yeah, Les was there.
Kind of showing you the ropes, right?
Yeah, he's introduced me to a bunch of folks down there. He's all in the know, knows everybody down there, I think. Yeah, it's really awesome hanging out with him, getting to see him again, and talk a little bit about maybe getting a book, his latest book, which is the West Virginia. I've got it over here. I'm pulling it out. Oh, here we go. West Virginia Cryptids, a visual field guide for traversing the mountain state. So he had a couple of copies out there. I talked to him about maybe seeing if we could get copies signed by both him and the artist. One for me, one for Steve, and then maybe one for our listeners, so we can put a little contest out there or something and put together a goodie bag here in the near future. And he said he could do that, but I did not realize that Mark Randall, who's the artist, lives in the Midwest. I missed that somehow.
Oh, so well, you know what? I guess we never asked. I just assumed that he was a local guy.
Right.
Yeah.
So he's going to see about maybe having Mark send a copy signed to him, and then he'll sign it, and then I'll hook up with him somewhere up here in Morgantown, and we'll, or maybe down in Marion County, and we'll hook up and get those books, which would be a lot of fun.
Yeah, great. That sounds awesome, man.
Yep.
So, yeah, I had a really good time, no doubt. Is that, I guess, your first kind of festival and all that?
No, I've been to lots of festivals, but my first cryptid festival for sure.
Okay, that's what I meant. Yeah, first cryptid festival.
I've been to a lot of nerd festivals in my life. To look at me, you might not think so. You're thinking, that's a football guy, but no. And then, that's pretty much all I have on that front. I did run across in the news Chad Underwood, who is the fighter pilot who took the footage, the flare pod footage for the Nimitz encounter, had his first ever interview, as far as I understand it, with Jeremy Corbell. And while that is a really good interview in and of itself, there's another YouTube channel that has another F-16 pilot who breaks it down and comments on various points that are made in the interview. And I found that to be a little bit more interesting because it has additional information you might not gather from, the lack of experience of being a fighter pilot, a little bit more insight. So both of those I'll put up on our Facebook page. And I think that's pretty much. I mean, I have another one out of Ottawa since we're talking about Canada. Please tell me Ottawa's in Canada. Right?
Yeah, man. It's in Canada.
It's not like in Mexico or something. Ottawa, Mexico.
There may be an Ottawa, Mexico.
Maybe.
I don't think so, but you never know.
Okay, so anyway. There was this case back in 1994 in Ottawa, and with all this latest revelations from the government that there are indeed UFOs, maybe not aliens, but just unidentified.
Well, they've admitted that UFOs are real.
Exactly.
Right? And I mean, that's one thing that motivated us to start this podcast.
Exactly. So there is a air controller who worked for the National Weather Station up in Ottawa. He recorded, along with tons of people who called into dispatch, seeing this UFO, and he saw it on his radar, and he said he'd never seen anything like it before in his career. He said it was pretty amazing, and they have a recording of him talking to dispatch about what he's picking up on radar, and he's very excited, and he's like, what on earth is that? So,
well, what was it? I mean, as far as what was the description of it, The
descriptions of the people who saw it was, it looked like Christmas lights in the sky rotating. Which is really interesting because there's quite a few cases like that, including the one we're going to talk about tonight.
Right. And I know there's some in Mexico that looked like that as well. Some cases, I don't know the details right now. I just remember it was It may have even been in South America. It was definitely a Latin type country.
Right.
I've got an interesting piece here. You know, since we did have Les on the show, I have been a little bit intrigued, but I ran across this story with cryptids and with Bigfoot in particular. I really hadn't given Bigfoot a ton of thought. I have right here a sighting. It's very recent. This was this past week. And there are some witnesses in this area that said they started hearing a howl that comes off in the woods, and then they seemed to hear a reply from another direction. There was one woman, I haven't heard it, but one woman did share with this newspaper that's reporting this, did share a cell phone recording. And she also shared it with the Bigfoot Field Researchers Organization and the Rocky Mountain Sasquatch Organization. It says here in the paper, the howl was familiar to one man who heard it, and he determined that its most likely source was a Bigfoot, also known as Sasquatch.
Well, his friend said, no, that's Doug.
She says that sometimes the howling, it's not every night, but sometimes the howling can be heard between 8:45 and 9:15, and sometimes between 11 p.m. and midnight. And said they've been hearing it on and off for months. We started hearing these sounds the 1st of May as the weather warmed up. We started going outside and working in the garden, she recalled. I happened to be in the backyard just sitting on the porch and enjoying the evening when I heard something strange. She called for her husband, asked him to listen and see if he recognized the noise. It seems to be coming from the general direction of the west. Google Maps shows the area to be hilly and heavily forested. We couldn't figure it out. We knew it wasn't a dog because we hear them barking. This was a mournful howl. And it's not a coyote because we've heard coyotes before. We hunt, and we've actually had coyotes come up to the corner of the property as we've dragged deer out and had to gut the deer there actually in this driveway just to keep the coyotes away. So I'm familiar with what a coyote sounds like, but this is different. They go on to say that they see these trees bent over, like saplings. You know, you hear reports of this sort of thing. You see logs like stacked up in these triangular, small logs stacked up in these interesting formations. They had a picture in there. But anyway, where I'm going with this, not an actual sighting, but this is in my county of West Virginia.
Oh, no way.
This is right down the road for me.
So you say logs were stacked, huh?
I mean, I guess I could go out and ride around and maybe see if I can hear something squalling. I don't know.
Sort of like
the Squatch may have heard about our podcast and is coming by,
It's sort of like that Ghostbusters scene where they're going through the library and they come across the stacked books.
Yeah.
Who would possibly stack books like this?
Yeah. Get her.
Get her. That was your plan?
But anyway, man, I could not believe that. That was in our local paper, that story. It's a long story. And apparently there's more than one witness. They keep hearing this. But, in the back of my mind, now, if I have any local listeners and you've heard this thing, I apologize, okay? I don't want to oversimplify your experience, okay? Obviously, you're, hunters, outdoorsmen, whatever, I get that. But sometimes animals that you're not familiar with kind of take up residence, maybe that hasn't lived near your home before in the woods.
Like Bigfoot.
Or like a screech owl.
Oh, yeah, screech owl.
They are creepy sounding if you've ever heard one.
Yeah, screech owls are sort of like your temperature inversions. It's an owl.
For sure. But I'm just, but at any rate, I just couldn't believe that. We've been doing this podcast now for a few months, and here I haven't had a local Bigfoot story to my recollection ever in my local paper.
Yeah, and, never down there.
This thing came up. It's crazy.
As a kid, you're always hoping, man, I wish Bigfoot would come here.
No, not me. I was scared to death of Bigfoot.
Well, when I got older, I was hoping, let Bigfoot come here. The local economy needs it.
We can always say it, dude.
That's right. Yeah. Well, I mean, you got integrity, man.
Well, yeah, you do have that. You have to think about.
Yep.
But so, you got anything else for the news tonight?
No. Is that all you have? That's more than enough.
All I have. That is all I've got.
I mean, that's Mercer County, where we're both from. That's awesome.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy. Anyway, with all that out of the way, before we take off to tonight's topic, I just would like to remind everyone to please rate and review our podcast. We're not really asking for much. We're just asking for to come in and give us a nice rating if you like what you hear. The more reviews we have, particularly on Apple Podcasts, helps I'm not going to be able to talk tonight. Helps bump us up in the ratings. If you pull up UFO podcasts or Bigfoot podcasts, man, there are a ton of them. And I will tell you that many of them are no longer active. They haven't done anything for years. But because they have a lot of ratings, even though the ratings are older, the reviews are older, they're still in there. And it still ranks them up higher because, you know, they have these ratings and reviews. So the more we get, the more ratings and reviews we get, it'll help bring us up to the top so more people can find the show. That's all we ask. You know, we do this for free for now.
Speak for yourself, man. I'm making a lot of money on the side. I'm selling Bigfoot juice.
Really? You're making money on this?
I'm selling Bigfoot juice, Bigfoot jerky, Bigfoot feet.
And anyway, while you're at it, check out our homepage, CosmicSponge.com. Jimmy posts all the episodes there, and you'll find links to all of our social media like Instagram, which Jimmy does an awesome job with. They're usually making fun of me. They're very funny.
I like it when it's easy.
Yeah. Finally, check out our Facebook page if you like reading about UFOs, Bigfoot, cryptids, that sort of thing. We typically post one or two news stories every day. So if you want a daily UFO or cryptid or paranormal type story in your feed, then just subscribe to our page. And we also have a group on there too.
Cosmic Sponge Theorist.
That's right. Cosmic Sponge Theorist. Jump on there. Check it out. So on to tonight's topic. We are going to be looking at the Falcon Lake UFO incident. This happened at Falcon Lake, Manitoba, May 20th, 1967. Falcon Lake is located...
Is that Canada?
That is in Canada,
okay.
Yes.
Okay,
yes,
just want to make sure
we're in Canada.
We're in the same place again. Okay, go ahead.
Right.
I messed you up.
Yeah, it's okay. All right.
Try to get.
So, Jimmy, I think you've done all the legwork on this one, as usual. Why don't you give us a rundown of this incident?
So, we're doing the one in Manitoba, which is in
Manitoba.
which is in Canada.
Not to be confused with Womanitoba.
Which is in Canada.
That was a bad joke.
That's terrible.
Please edit that one out because I know you're doing this one.
Yes. All right, what are we doing?
All right, my man. Let us know what happened on this. What happened at Falcon Lake on May 20th, 1967?
Before May 20th, let's take a step back and go to May 19th.
Oh.
Ooh, you weren't expecting that, were you?
I was not expecting to start this story a day early. Hopefully, it's not going to be another academic story about the settling of Canada by colonists or ancient man or something like that.
Let me get my professor scarf. So here we go. So our story is about Stefan. Now, often we'll see that his name, when I was doing my research, is Stefan, Stephan. I've seen it like 100 different ways, but it's really Stefan.
I've seen it spelled with an F.
It is.
Like Stefan.
It is his real name. He's Polish. It's Stefon, I think. Maybe Stefon. A-N, rather. I don't know. But I'm going to go as saying it as Stefan. Enough on the Stefan stuff. I don't know why we get so hung up on languages.
It's Stefan.
Stefan.
Right?
It's Stefan. Stefan, and now comes his last name. Are you ready for this?
Oh, my God. Are we ever going to start this story?
The story is about Stefan Michalak.
There you go.
Michalak.
Good enough. Michalak. Is the way
Michalak.
It's what it looks like to me. Michalak or Michalak.
I'm just going to call him Stefan. Friday, May 19th, 1967, 3:30 p.m. Stefan clocks out of his job as an industrial mechanic working for the Inland Cement Company, where he had been employed for about 6 or 7 years. He had plans this weekend, it being a special weekend for him, to scout out the Falcon Lake area for potential claims for precious minerals that could be found in that area. His wife made him a lunch consisting of some cheese, sausage, apples, buns, and some oranges. And after collecting his lunch, he took his overnight bag, which included his prospecting tools. This included things like raw porcelain bricks, an axe, hammer, magnet, welding glasses, gloves, books, prospecting notes, those kinds of things.
Yeah, your prospecting kit.
Right. I did not know what the raw porcelain bricks were for because, you know, I didn't do geology but once, and that was in college years and years ago. But they use the porcelain to check rock formations using streak and coloring attributes that come off on the porcelain to determine what kind of minerals they are. And then that helps, I guess, allows them to like zone in on specific, more precious minerals. Anyway, after collecting all of this stuff, his overnight bag, his prospecting toolkit, and his lunch, he has his oldest son, Mark, who's attending university but still living at home, to drive him to the bus station, where at 7:15 he takes off for the Falcon Motel. He arrives at the Falcon Lake Motel somewhere between 9:15 and 9:30, secures a room, unpacks, reads through his geology books, and then around 11 o'clock, he goes to the coffee shop in the motel, has a hamburger and a cup of coffee, speaks to the man behind the counter about prospecting in the area, and then he returns to his room around 11:30. And at that point, he reads for a little bit longer, and then he goes to sleep. May 20th, 1967. Around 5:30 a.m., he leaves the motel at Falcon Lake and runs into the Mothman. Steve has left me again. And therefore, we have a Mothman story. Mothman was attending a convention at Falcon Lake. And of course, his wings would tire out after flying for a little while. So instead, he booked a flight on a spaceship ran by the Greys. I think it was Greys Intergalactic Transport Systems. Anyway, Mothman approaches Manitoba. He gets out with his flares. Oh, anyway, enough about Mothman. Back to our story.
You know what?
What?
I was waiting for it.
So
what happened?
I've become predictable.
Michalak saw you, Mothman.
I didn't say anything about Mothman. That was you. All right, back to it. Saturday, May 20th, 1967. Around 5:30 a.m., Stefan leaves the motel at Falcon Lake to begin the day prospecting. He starts by having a little lunch in the hotel room, his words, which means I guess he's eating his lunch for breakfast, but not all of it. Eats a little bit of it, leaves the hotel, puts the key for the room on the desk, and walks to a booth just down the main highway there, Highway 1. And there's a booth where they have cars coming by, and I guess they check the cars for some reason, maybe entrance to the park or something. The hotel's located on the south side of this highway. He crosses at that booth into the north side and then into the woods. Now, at this point in time, there are not a lot of trails. So you're really roughing it when you go into the woods. You don't have a trail to go by. He uses a map and compass. About 7:30 a.m., the maid cleans the room and confirms later that Stefan wasn't in his room at that time, so they know he left before 7:30. Stefan begins checking quartz veins and working his way deeper into the surrounding wilderness. As he passes a pond, he startles some geese, who eventually settle down once again as he continues to work this quartz vein along a Precambrian rock facing. Now, he's about 150 to 200 feet away from the pond while he's doing that. And he works it until about 11 o'clock, and then he stops and has some lunch, looking around, enjoying Mother Nature. And then around 12 o'clock noon, just before that, about 11:45, he gets back to work. And around 12 o'clock, give or take, the mother goose on the pond starts making a lot of noise. So he turns to see what's going on. The first thing he notices is there's some light emanating in the area around where the geese are located, and he looks up to see what's projecting this light and sees two cigar-shaped vehicles floating in the sky radiating red light. They approach from about 255 degrees south-southwest. He's able to identify the exact trajectory because he uses his map and compass to determine the path that the ships took when they left, which was the same direction they took when they came in. The sky was cloudy. Clouds were pretty high. A few thousand feet away was what he estimated. The visibility was good. It had rained 3 or 4 hours before. He only required reading glasses, so it wasn't like his eyes were seeing things that, he couldn't make out. He can make them out really well. He's wearing a pair of welding goggles, which is interesting. I thought that was weird, but he had a really pragmatic reason for using these, because what he would do is he would put these welding goggles on so when he's chipping away at rock, he wouldn't have any of the rocks shivers come up and hit him in the eyes.
Okay, well, my understanding of it, if you've ever seen welding goggles, they have a clear lens, and then you flip down the tinted lens because you're essentially blind when you have those on, you can't see anything through them until the very bright arc of what you're welding appears. So I'm sure he had the tinted version flipped up.
That's correct. And those were number 6 welding goggles. And he was wearing a cap. And because he had those goggles flipped up, he had the cap on backwards so it didn't interrupt with the lid of the hat, which is important for later as well. So he watches these vehicles. There's 2 of them. They both descend. One of them actually lands on this large piece of Precambrian rock that's out there with, all the other rock, lands on it, while the other one hovers about 10 feet off the ground and then eventually leaves. The first one that landed is still there, and it stays there for about 45 minutes, according to him. And in that time, he's crouching behind some brush, watching it, and he actually takes the time to pull out some drawing materials. He wished he had a camera. Not having that, he goes to his next best thing, which is his book and pencils, and just starts sketching it.
Yeah, from what I understand, didn't he sit there for something like 30 minutes drawing the sketch or something? The craft was on the ground in front of him for a good amount of time, right?
Right. So when the 2 craft, one landed, the other one stayed in the air 10 feet off the ground for just a few minutes. He said 2 or 3 minutes, and then flew off. The other ship that remained was there for 45 minutes, and it wasn't until 45 minutes into this that he took the time to walk towards it. He took a sketch during this time, and you can see the sketch online. There's a lot of places, and we'll put it up on this episode's website page that we have for this episode. But he estimated it was between 35 and 40 feet long and up to about 11 feet high, and 11 feet height. It actually had a doorway that opened up after it had been on the ground for a little bit.
I'd like to add one little detail here.
Yeah.
That it was emitting a humming sound, also had a sulfurous stench.
Yeah, and it also had suction. It was pulling air. He mentioned that as well.
In through the doorway.
Right. The doorway opened, and when he got up close to it, he could see inside, and he noticed that, first of all, it looked like it was very smooth, the whole ship, as if it had been molded from one piece. It was metallic on the outside, like stainless steel, he says. The width of the outside wall where the door had opened up was about 22 inches. As he approached, he heard the ruling, but he also thought he heard up to 2 different voices. He was pretty sure it's 2 distinct voices, humanoid, he thought, but he couldn't make out the language.
He specifically says they sounded like humans.
Yeah, childlike. And
he said one had a higher pitched voice than the other.
Right. And he thought that this was an American craft because, Lord knows, Canadians didn't have anything like that. And it had to be the Americans.
That Aero car, they never even quite got that off, about 3 feet off the ground, I think. The big round flying saucer, that fan thing they built.
Oh, yeah. The Aero
something.
I actually wrote it down because I had it as one of the things we were going to talk about. But since you brought it up, yeah.
No. Let's continue with the incident first, please.
Okay. Anyway, he watches this thing. He walks up to it 45 minutes in. He thinks he's hearing voices from inside, so he calls out to him, and he says something like, actually, I wrote down.
I think he says, "Hey, Yankee boys."
Hey, Yankee boys. Do you need any help? Something like that. Here's exactly what he says he said. If you are Yankee boys, you come on out and don't be afraid. I don't sell your secrets for a lousy green buck. If you need help, just come on out. And he doesn't hear anything. That goes silent. The voices stop. But nobody comes out. And he walks a little closer. And then he repeats himself. First in German, then Italian, Polish, Ukrainian, and Russian. He speaks like 6 languages. He says, good enough to get by is what he said.
I can barely speak English well enough to get by.
I'm working on it. I'm getting there, some would say. Others, not so much. Then just a couple minutes later, the hatch closes. It closes in thirds. So one horizontally from the left, and the other piece horizontally from the right, and then the bottom piece from the inside, and it's seamless.
I do want to add one little detail to that while we're right here. He says when he addressed the speakers in several languages, asking if he could help, he got no answer. So he poked his head through the opening into the interior and saw a maze of lights. He also when he leaned in, he touched the exterior of the craft, and his glove started to melt. It was very hot. And then that's whenever the doors started sliding and sealed the opening. The 3-panel doors, as Jimmy had described just now.
Yep. He had in his kit, his prospecting kit, these big, heavy workman's gloves. And one of them, they have it on display at the university in Manitoba or in Winnipeg. I think it's in Winnipeg. They have all of that stuff on display there. Burnt, like the index finger and the middle finger of that glove, significantly.
Mm-hmm. And you can see pictures of it online if you want to take a look at it.
Yeah, and we'll post those as well so people can see them on the episode's webpage. Once the hatch had closed, the ship started to rotate in a counterclockwise direction. There were also some grills that he had noticed in the side of the ship, 3 feet by 3 feet grill work. And a burst of hot air, heated gas, he thought, came out of that and caught his shirt on fire. He fell back, ripped off his shirt, and then turned to see the ship flying away. It flew away in the same direction that it had come, and it was colored bright red, and then as it faded off in the distance, it changed to an orange color. He could see the power lines that were running along the highway, and he estimated it was about 2 miles from the power lines that ran alongside of number 1 highway. Okay, so he's burned, and he's laying on the ground. He's ripped off his shirt. He has an overshirt and an undershirt. He's taken the over one off, and the under one he's ripped off. His skin is burnt just a little bit, 1st-degree burns. He starts walking around the area where the ship was and just measuring it out, checking it out for just a little bit. But then he starts to feel really nauseous, and then he starts to throw up. He's feeling woozy and lightheaded, and he starts to worry. He starts thinking, maybe I got radiation poisoning from this thing. So he starts making his way back to the road. It takes him a little while to get back. He makes it out from the road and starts walking down the highway towards the motel, thinking he needs a doctor. A Royal Canadian Mounted Police officer was doing his regular patrol, drives by Stefan, noticing that he's acting a little peculiar, as if he's drunk, and is waving frantically at him. So he continues down the road till he finds a place to turn around and comes back up and talks to Stefan. Offers him a ride, but Stefan refuses. But somewhere between 3 and 4 o'clock, Stefan approaches the motel owner, Miss Merton Buke, and asks for a doctor. She refers him to the Royal Canadian Mounted Police Detachment, so he goes back there. Later, he finds out from them that the nearest hospital is like 40 miles away or something like that. So he returns to the motel and asks to make a call to Winnipeg. They point him to the phone outside. For those of you who don't remember phone booths, they used to be around everywhere. So he goes out and he calls his son to tell him he'll be on the bus and that he'll need somebody to pick him up and take him to the hospital when he arrives. A lot of people who saw him said that he behaved as if he were intoxicated, though he didn't smell of alcohol.
Right. I've got the police report here.
Excellent.
This is the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, the RCMP, and I'm trying to see the officer's name, and it does not appear on what I have for the police report. This is 20th May 67, number 1. At approximately 3 p.m. this date, I was patrolling 1/2 mile west of Falcon Beach, Manitoba, when I noticed a man walking on the south shoulder of the highway towards Falcon Beach. He was wearing a gray cap, brown jacket with no shirt, light-colored trousers, carrying a brown briefcase. This subject, upon seeing the police car, began waving his arms excitedly. I turned around on the highway and drove back to see what he wanted. He shouted to me to stay away from him. I asked him why, and he replied, saying that he had seen 2 spaceships. He said I might get some sort of skin disease or radiation if I came too close. He seemed very upset. I asked for some identification, and he gave me a document pertaining to prospecting, which showed his name as Stefan Michalak. I inquired as the circumstances surrounding his unusual experience, and he related the following story. He apparently had been prospecting approximately 1 mile west and 2 miles north of Falcon Beach. About 12 noon, he sighted the 2 spaceships. He said they were rotating at a high rate of speed and emitted a red glow. The spaceships landed near him, and he reportedly touched one. The exhaust or some sort of hot substances came off the spaceship, burning his shirt, chest, and hat. The spaceships remained a while how long he was not certain, then flew away. He left the bush to get medical treatment. Michalak showed me his cap, the back of which was burnt. I wanted to examine his shirt. However, he would not let me and kept backing away every time I got close to him. As far as I was able to determine, the back of Michalak's head was not burnt. It appeared to me that Michalak had taken black substances, possibly wood ashes, and rubbed it on his chest. At no time during my conversations with Michalak would he allow me close enough to him to definitely see whether or not he was injured. I asked him why his hands were not burnt if he had touched the spaceship, and he would not answer me. At my request, he drew a diagram of the spaceship, which appeared to be saucer-shaped. I could not smell the odor of liquor on Michalak. His general appearance was not dissimilar of that of a person who has overindulged. His eyes were bloodshot, and when questioned in detail, could or would not answer coherently. I offered to drive him to Falcon Beach and arrange for someone to treat him, but he declined, saying he was all right. Approximately 1/2 hour later, he came to the detachment office and asked for me, and he would not enter the office. But then it goes on to, he just looked for directions for how to get to a phone and to be able to call his son to say, I'm going to be on the bus, come and get me.
Yes.
So anyway, that's in his words. That's the police report of the officer that Jimmy had just mentioned.
Yeah, a little bit more information on that. First of all, that was Constable G.A. Solotki, Solotki.
It's not on this report for some reason.
I have the
Maybe that was on a header or something like that.
I have the full report with his signature at the end of it. Constable G.A. Solotki, number 23446, Falcon Beach Highway Patrol.
So let's move on. What happens next? Is there any anything about? So he's disoriented for sure. After this experience, after he was shot with these hot gases or whatever happened to him, it made him sick. He threw up immediately, made his way finally out of the woods, flagged down this police officer. Police officer described him as being incoherent almost and acting very strangely, but he wasn't able to actually examine any kind of injuries on him. He checks out of his hotel and decides to go home because the nearest hospital is 40 miles away.
Yeah, so I want to talk a little bit about this encounter with the police because Michalak has a different take on what went down with that. Michalak's account of the interaction with the RCMP patrol car and Constable Solat was slightly different. He saw the car approaching, raised his hand, and waved about frantically, but the car passed by without stopping. From his perspective, he thought that there was a complete indifference to his signaling. So he continued walking and making slow progress. His stomach was still churning from being sick. His head was pounding. His only thought was he needed to get to Falcon Lake as soon as possible. The odor of burning electric motor and sulfur lingered about him, constantly bringing back the things that he had seen. As he staggered alongside the road, he heard a voice calling to him, and he turned to see the RCMP constable had returned. So briefly, he gave him an account of what had happened, warning him not to come close to me because I feared the possibility of spreading radiation. Now, this is Michalak's account of communicating with this police officer, which isn't in the report. He asked about medical aid, and he's like, sorry, man, I got duties to perform here. He doesn't say, sorry, man. He says, sorry, I have duties to perform here.
He might have.
He might have said, it probably said something like,
he might have said, sorry, eh?
Yeah, I was going to say that. Sorry, eh? But I have duties to perform here, eh? He stared at him, unbelieving what he just heard. He apparently didn't believe a word that he had to say. Come on, you say that you saw UFOs in the middle of the woods. What's the police officer to believe, particularly given the sensibilities of the time? So the constable, from his perspective, just left him with his sickness and disappointment. Him thinking that every human being mattered, no matter how small or great. So he doesn't see this as he doesn't even say that this constable offered him a ride. He's saying that this guy didn't even offer him a ride and just left him there, and then he goes on to talk to the people at Falcon Lake asking for assistance, and eventually, he makes the call to his son, and then he sets outside of the hotel waiting for the bus to arrive. At that point, he waits, the bus arrives, he gets on the bus, and then he goes back home. His son picks him up and takes him to the hospital. Yeah, and he's really worried about radiation because even on the bus, he moves all the way to the rear of the bus, hoping to separate himself from other passengers. And it's worth mentioning that the account that we're giving here is Michalak's account for the most part, other than the report that we just gave from the officer. Everything again is directly from him, and either from an interview that he gave with officials or the pamphlet that he eventually would write that outlines specifically what went on during the whole event.
I don't know of any other witnesses that have really been discussed, have really come forward, other than his son has written a book and just published a few years ago. I've seen him interviewed about the incident, and we'll get to that in a little while. I think his big concern was that he had received a large dose of radiation, because not only did it burn him, but as soon as the ship departed and he made his way to the woods, he started throwing up and became very disoriented and was sick. So I'm sure in his mind he thought, I've just been irradiated, so I don't want anyone close to me. I may be dead tomorrow from radiation sickness.
He moves to the rear of the bus, separating himself from the other passengers as much as possible, fearing that he has radiation poisoning and doesn't want to injure any other people. His eldest son, Mark, met him at the Winnipeg bus depot, and that was about 10:15 p.m., and took him directly to the Miscordia Hospital. The doctor there examined him and asked how he got his burns. So he didn't want to tell the doctor that he had seen a UFO, and in part because the doctor was Chinese origin, he says, and didn't speak the best English, and he didn't want to really get into this miscommunication that may occur. So he just basically says that he was hit with some exhaust from an aeroplane. He goes home. They move him, his son, who's his youngest son. So there's 3 children living at the house. 2 of them are older at university. That would be, I think Eva was the daughter, the oldest daughter. I think she was the oldest child. And then there was Mark, who's the oldest son. And then the youngest son was Stan, who was around 9 years old at the time. He was staying in the same bedroom as the parents. It was a small house. They moved him to the basement so that the father could have the room to recover. And he had this sulfur smell coming off of him this whole time. On his stomach, he had the grid pattern that was present in the spacecraft. So when it burned him in that grid pattern on his stomach. And then he had first-degree burns up his chest and a little on his neck.
So the injuries were real.
Yes.
I mean, that's something important to note. It wasn't that he just burned his hat and his glove and his shirt and said it set my shirt on fire. There are pictures of this account. And that's one reason I think this one has always been memorable to me. Even as a kid, growing up in my house, we had the book Flying Saucer Serious Business. But I can remember looking at those pictures even then. And those pictures are on the internet. We'll put some links up, so you can take a look at them yourself. Definitely wasn't faking. He was in the hospital. He had some serious symptoms and was sick, and he had this strange sulfur odor emanating from his body.
Word got out that he had
had this encounter,
in part because he had contacted a newspaper because he wanted to warn people to stay away from that area. He didn't want anybody else to get injured. That's the reason he gave. And there was a lot of people that wanted to talk to him about this. There was Mary Lou Armstrong of the University of Colorado, officials from the BBC, the CBC, Professor James McDonald, which we talked about with the Westall case, who was a ufologist of the day, the University of Tucson, representatives of the Winnipeg Free Press and Winnipeg Tribune, and many others, as well as, officials from the military, both American and Canadian. And so there's a mention here that the Condon Committee did not hold this in high regard because Stefan couldn't find the site.
Right.
After
the Condon Committee wanted to look at it. They were active at the time. If you recall, they worked on this 2-year study. The University of Colorado were commissioned by the United States government to study UFOs. So they started in 1966 and concluded in 1968 with a report that said there's nothing to UFOs. We discussed that at length in the History of UFOs Declassified Part 2, I think episode 4 of our show. Whenever the Condon Committee went out to the area, Mr. Michalak was still exhibiting symptoms. He was still somewhat disoriented. He could not find the site, and they chalked it up as a hoax. They thought he'd made up the whole story.
Yeah, they sent a representative, Professor Roy Craig. Yeah. they found that material. What was it? The radioactive silver material that they'd found in the thing. And that was really the icing on the cake for them in terms of seeing it as a hoax.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, explain that.
Yeah, I was going to go back here to the thing because there's quite a lot here that is really interesting. There is a interview that was done in June when finally Stefan started feeling better. Now, initially, they went to him and they wanted him to go with them, the military, to go look at the site for him to show them where it was so that they could investigate it themselves. He was just not feeling well enough to go. So they have him draw it out on a map for them. They go out and they explore the area, aren't able to locate it. They have quite a few men go out, check it out, cannot find where it is. So they come back to him and say, look, we can't find it. We really need you to come out with us. And they requisition a helicopter as well to assist in trying to find this location. And they go out again with him and they can't find it. Now, what you come out to find later, it looks like he wanted to stake a claim because he felt the location that he'd found was valuable. And he didn't want to reveal it to anybody until he was able to stake a claim because he was afraid that they would not allow him to file a claim on the area. So that's the reason he claims he didn't.
I saw that. It was, let me see, Skeptic Aaron Sokolich. Is that who you're talking about? He reviewed the report made by Michalak to the police shortly after incident, along with other evidence, concluded that Michalak was indeed burned, but that the burns were likely caused by an accident brought on by alcohol consumption, and that Michalak, who was prospecting for silver ore near the lake at the time, probably made the story up to keep other prospectors out of the area. Well, let me debunk this debunking right away. First of all, here's another case of somebody just hearing a story and just going, he was probably drunk, and he made it up because he was prospecting, didn't want anybody else getting his claim. Well, let me ask you something. If I told you that a UFO landed in my field, all right, and I got burnt on this UFO, but I don't want anybody going into this field because I'm afraid you're going to get hurt, how many people, if the word got out, do you think would flock to this site? That would be the worst thing in the world to tell people, right? That there's a UFO there, that a UFO landed. That would not keep people away. That would attract people. That's a ridiculous idea. Now, perhaps the skeptic thinks that man never thought of that, but I think anybody would think of that. Everyone would want to see where the UFO landed. Am I wrong?
You're right, but that was actually Stan's words that he didn't tell them because he wanted to make the claim. He was worried about it. So there's a really great book written by Chris Rakowski.
Yeah, but you're missing my point. He didn't tell them. Oh, you're saying he didn't tell them where the site was.
Correct.
Oh, I see what you're saying now.
Yeah, because he was worried.
But then why make up the whole story? But again, this happened to him.
It did. But, I mean, you got to look at him. He's
a
Polish.
The skeptic's trying to say the reason he said it's a UFO is he's trying to keep people away, like pulling a Scooby-Doo. The haunted house is there, but there's really a silver vein underneath. Well, exactly. I mean, isn't that what they always try to do? Scare people away because they had something going on?
Right.
In the basement of the house or something like that. I think that was an episode of the Andy Griffith Show, too. They had a moonshine still inside the old abandoned house. Of course, Andy figured it all out.
Of course.
But Barney and Gomer, they were pretty damn scared.
Barney and Gomer. I mean, with names like Barney and Gomer, no offense to Barney and Gomer's out there.
It was Gomer before he left for the Marines.
Have you ever met anybody named Gomer?
Never.
Would you name your kid Gomer?
I would not.
I'm going to...
Next question.
we have upset all of our Gomer listeners.
All of our Andy Griffith fans. Well, I didn't say anything disparaging about Andy Griffith's show. I think it's pretty cool.
Yeah, because I would have smacked you. Loved it.
Funny show in its day. Pretty good portrayal of Southern people, I think. For a comedy. I mean, it was supposed to be a comedy.
Yeah, West Virginian Don Knotts playing Barney.
There you go.
Yeah, so there are, I guess, several things. So they did convince him that, no one's going to disallow your claim. You'll be able to take your claim. Everything's fine. Just show us where the place is. So he does. It's interesting that they mention it's just 50 feet away from where the crew had been the previous day, but the brush was so thick that you couldn't see it from where they were. So it was easy to miss. The other interesting thing is there is a ranger station within sight of the landing position, and that's another thing that skeptics bring up.
Well within sight. It landed on a big flat rocky area. The site is clearly visible by this ranger station. If something like that came down, one would assume that the ranger on duty would have seen it if he wasn't asleep or something.
Right. Maybe he's taking a nap. Maybe he was on his
iPhone, right?
Maybe he was taking a pretty dedicated poop.
Yeah.
I mean,
well, on the other hand, it was supposed to be there for 45 minutes, so he may want to think about hitting a correct doll.
Like, I knew I shouldn't eat down at Martha's Mexican pancake night on Friday.
Bacon.
Canadian bacon Mexican. And so anyway, that's one thing. So the ranger station didn't see it, but over the years, there have been some people who come forward and claim they saw red orbs or orange orbs in the light that day.
But that always happens.
That always happens.
You have to admit.
Yeah.
I think the most compelling thing about this case is the burns, the physical evidence. I mean, who would make up a story like that? So here's the report from NICAP. It goes through the story just like we talked about, and his sighting and being burned. So there were throughout the next 2 years, Michalak was examined by more than 12 physicians in the United States and Canada. Site investigations were made by members of the RCMP, the RCAF, government officials, and numerous civilians. The number of government departments and officials who were involved in this case is staggering. And the ground party which traveled with Michalak to the site, there were representatives of RCAF, Royal Canadian Air Force, Training Command Headquarters, Canadian Forces Base, Winnipeg, RCMP, Criminal Investigations Division, and the Federal Department of Health and Welfare, the Manitoba Provincial Department of Health and Welfare. In addition, the University of Colorado Condon Committee investigated. Life magazine reporters came to Manitoba, and 2 connected but separate civilian groups, APRO, which is the Aerial Phenomena and Research Organization, and CAPRO, which is the same as APRO, only Canadian. Furthermore, the Federal Department of Mines and Natural Resources took an interest, as did White Shell Nuclear Research Establishment, the Manitoba Cancer Institute, the Mayo Clinic, a host of other medical establishments, I guess in regards to his injuries. The scope of this intense investigation cannot be understated. Falcon Lake case may well be one of the most intensely investigated, well documented on record. The case presents a number of elements of particular interest to researchers. Michalak's burns and other physiological effects, the ground traces found at the site, radioactivity allegedly associated with the site, and mysterious metal fragments found at the site. A couple things. Now, again, this is a NICAP. Now, they're a pro-UFO, UFO-friendly investigative group. With regard to Michalak's mental state, an examining psychiatrist at the Mayo Clinic noted, "I found no evidence of dreams or hallucinations. The MMPI was not extraordinary. I could find no overt evidence of significant mental or emotional illness." In the RCAF report on the incident, much was made of Michalak's association with a man named Gerald Hart. Hart was known to the RCMP as a subversive individual. So when Michalak told them that Hart had assisted him in his quest for the site of his encounter, officials became suspicious. Among other eccentricities, Hart refused to pay income tax and in fact wrote a popular book on how to avoid paying the government anything. Furthermore, the actions of civilian UFO investigators were a cause for concern in the minds of officials. In particular, Barry Thompson, described by a former CAPRO member as a liaison between CAPRO and APRO, was a constant companion of Mr. Michalak, and he appeared to be the spokesman for Mr. Michalak during some of the interviews. Both the investigating officer and Professor Craig of the Condon Committee agreed there appeared to be monetary gain intentions associated with this relationship. Now, that's their opinion, right?
Yep.
Now, according to this report, they said there was never any monetary gain from the incident. Michalak's own narrative account was privately published in late 1967. His manuscript, written in Polish, was translated and printed as a 40-page booklet, which quickly sold out. But Michalak saw little of the money recovered after the publication costs, and to this day, is bitter that others have made money from my experience, but not me. That was quoted as saying in 1980. So that is kind of an odd individual, little questionable relationship.
And he had to share the claim with Hart. I don't know how that came into play, but also he claims, that being Stefan claims, that as time went on between May 20th and later, a 13-year-old girl from Winnipeg, Darlene Bagley, reported seeing a similar thing. She made a sketch of it. Her sketch was not unlike the one he had made.
When was this? When did she have her sighting?
That same day, apparently. Also, 2 boys saw something near Falcon Lake at noon on May 20th, the day of the experience, but it doesn't elaborate on what they claim they saw. And within 4 weeks before and after of seeing his object there were at least 20 reported sightings in the area.
Oh, wow.
Now, this is from the pamphlet that he wrote, I think.
Where else do we want to go with this one? We know we have Mr. Michalak had this very strange encounter, showed up being badly burned, and stayed pretty sick for a couple of weeks. And none of the doctors could really get to the bottom of what caused his symptoms, as far as the unusual smell, the burns on his chest, and they are in a grid pattern. They are little round holes, as if this hot gas or hot air just shot straight out onto his body. He had kept the burnt shirt, which you can still see, and the gloves and the hat that was also burned. It just seems that something very strange happened there. Something very strange happened to him. Did he make up a story that it was a UFO? I don't know.
So I think I want to bring in Squadron Leader Paul Biskey, which I think he is probably the most interesting character in this whole story that I found. He's a Royal Canadian Air Force officer, and he was the investigating military officer on the case. His report to the Canadian Forces headquarters are remarkable in detail and very candid in his comments. Complicating the reports is the fact that Biskey is a devout skeptic, which, I'm a big fan of skeptics, and told researchers he didn't believe in the UFO stuff. How much his personal opinions may have influenced his report are not known, but this gets really interesting. Biskey thought Michalak was a liar, without a doubt. At one point during his investigation, he bluntly asked if he had been drinking on the day of the experience because he believed maybe he was hallucinating because of alcoholic stupor. And he was sure that was the case because when they did their investigations, they found that the man behind the counter that Stefan was talking to the night before claimed that he had consumed 5 beers.
When? Though, the night before?
The night before, but that he had drunk, but Stefan had said, I absolutely didn't drink. He claims he had a hamburger and coffee. So that's one discrepancy, a lie. But this gets interesting, too, because the guy said it was around 8:30, but there's no way it could have happened at 8 or 8:30 because he didn't arrive at the hotel until after 9:15 because he came in on the bus. So the timeline didn't match up. The guy in the hotel was like, I might be mistaken about the time, but that's the guy who ordered the 5 beers. And then Biskey says Mr. Michalak had staunchly denied having consumed alcoholic beverages at any time while at Falcon Lake. Yet a reliable witness at Falcon Lake advised that he personally had served him 4 to 5 bottles of beer the night prior to the trip in the bush. Then he goes on to say it was proven Michalak does consume alcoholic beverages, and in fact, to some considerable extent. After coming out from the alleged site, Michalak was proposedly taken to the same bar where he had consumed the 5 beers the night prior to his initial encounter on the 20th May, 1967. Although he declined the offer of beer, it cannot determine whether this was done because he did not like beer or not. He did accept the offer of several rye Presbyterians. Is that what they used to call, like, alcohol? Is that old people talk?
I have no idea. I've never heard that. I thought Presbyterian was like a church.
Yeah, well, all the Presbyterians I know drink.
I gotta get a drink.
Okay. So
water.
So while Steve is off getting a couple of rye Presbyterians, he did accept the offer of several rye Presbyterians, which is rye, half water, and ginger ale mix. I didn't know that. In fact, he went so far as to purchase a round of drinks for the group. He appeared to hold his alcohol reasonably well, although it was noticed that he did loosen up after the 3rd drink and become quite gay, telling numerous stories. When questioned about the vast discrepancy in direction the object departed, he just shrugged his shoulders and laughed it off. When last seen, he was in a jovial mood, remaining at the bar, presumably to await the arrival of his 2 assistants from Winnipeg. Okay, this doesn't line up at all, right? He didn't have assistants from Winnipeg. Are they talking about the same guy?
Yeah, I don't know, man. When I read one of these, skeptics like this, they're always the same. This sounds just like, what's that other guy? The aviation guy, Aviation Week writer. They go around and interview everyone except the actual person that had the encounter. And they just try to poke holes in a lot of stories. And he says, okay, this guy's that served him the alcohol is a very reliable witness. Why is that? Sounds to me like he's a bartender. If he didn't corroborate what Biskey already thinks, then he would be an unreliable witness.
Well, I think the final line here is interesting, which is why I brought it up. Despite all of his attempts to find flaws in Michalak's story, Biskey was forced to concede that, quote, there are certain facts such as Mr. Michalak's illness and burns and the very evident circle remaining at the site, which are unexplainable. So even under, end quote, even under intense scrutiny of biased military investigators, the case appeared sound.
And, this is what the NICAP report says since this reliable witness was obviously a bartender and Biskey did not state how his source's own reliability had been established, Biskey seems to want to prove there was at least one inconsistency or lie in Michalak's testimony, and the issue of alcohol consumption seems to be a choice target. In retrospect, even if Michalak admitted to drinking several beers, there would still remain the problem of the other physical and psychological evidence. Michalak's drinking problem had no bearing on the case itself, and I have to agree with that. What if he did have 4 or 5 beers the night before? Big deal. He came out of those woods all burned up and has this grill pattern literally burned into his chest. Something happened to him.
Yeah.
Something happened.
And he didn't take any alcohol with him.
And he didn't have these injuries or the burnt clothes when he left. So something happened in the woods. I mean, that's just, again, these skeptics try to poke a few little holes into somebody's story, a few inconsistencies, so they can throw it all out.
See, I can do it too. The patterns on his chest mimic that of a badminton racket. So he was in the forest and he come across a bunch of people playing badminton.
Obviously.
With heated metal rackets. And they got angry at one another and started smacking each other in the bare stomach with their metal badminton rackets.
Oh, I see what a Presbyterian is. It's a name of a drink. It's rye and half water ginger ale mix.
And see, folks,
That's what they call a Presbyterian.
He walked away again when I was explaining that.
Oh, well.
But I didn't say that the Mothman made it.
Well, anyway, we've been at this for a little while. Let's start wrapping this thing up. What else do we have? Do we have anything really? I mean, all I know is the man went into the woods. I think something definitely happened to him. He definitely got hurt, and it seemed to have affected him years later, at least psychologically. He felt it was his duty to report this because he did get hurt. And he wanted to let officials know that there's this craft. I mean, similar to Carl Parker and, the 2 Mississippian abductees. When they decided to come forward and tell the police what happened, they're thinking, hey, the authorities need to know that this thing's out here abducting people. And he's the same way. He's like, people need to know that there's this craft flying around and I got pretty hurt and I may have radiation sickness. I need to tell officials about this. And he regretted it. He regretted ever telling anyone about it because of all this negative attention that he got for the rest of his life. He became that guy that was burned by the UFO. He never benefited from it financially. In fact, as I said a little while ago, he complained about the fact that other people made a lot of money from his episode.
Well, so we have the radiation in the area. So there was natural radiation located in the area. And he did take soil samples and in addition to the silver samples that him and Hart dug out of the rock itself. There's some speculation that was actually silver that would have been melted down, sheet silver that had been melted down, layered over, and then irradiated using radium off of watch facings.
My answer to that is why.
to lend credence to
perpetuate the hoax.
Yes, that's the thought. But regardless, I mean, you throw that out because no one believes that Stefan did it. If it was done by other actors, probably some of the UFO groups that were involved in the case, is what everyone agrees.
Right.
But the soil samples, though, did have radiation in them, and that led them to find out that, yes, indeed, that area is littered with natural uranium. They had a group come in from the government to make sure it wasn't at levels that were going to be dangerous for the public. And I guess it was it's higher than normal, but low enough to where they didn't have to worry about it. There's the radiation part. The other thing is, at one point, one of the doctors, they eliminated that it was radiation burns that Stefan had taken on. So he didn't have radiation burns. Instead, they thought it was chemical burns, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah, very much so.
And
yeah, they pretty much ruled out radiation pretty quickly, any kind of radiation burn.
When asked to provide the location of the site, Michalak objected very strongly on the basis that during his 25th of June hunt, he had in fact located what he had searched for originally, and until such time as he could stake his claim, had no intention of having anyone go near the area. It was pointed out to him that there was no intention of jumping his claim, and that it was interest of the Canadian public that he showed the site to Biskey. Said no matter what anyone thought of him, he would not cooperate until his claim was filed. It turns out, however, that he had to share his claim with his newfound partner, Mr. Hart, whom he had never met before. This was particularly surprising since he was noticeably suspicious of the RCMP for the visit, so much so that he did not invite them into the basement to examine some of the latest samples brought back from the latest hot find. However, when they did finally convince him to show the site on July the 28th, they were baffled by its appearance and location. Quote, Mr. Michalak successfully led the party to the site in approximately 45 minutes, going through considerable heavy brush and undergrowth. The site was within 50 yards of the ground where the ground party had searched on June 1st. But it was not visible at that time because of the heavy brush located between the two areas. So
I've seen on documentaries, where they've gone to that site, that rock and everything.
You can take horse rides up there now. And
what's that?
You can take horse rides up there. They have like trail horses that they'll put you on and take you up to where the UFO site is. And nice. They have like UFO burgers in the cafe there at Falcon Lake, and then they got a little UFO shop. So they're making some money off of this.
Yeah. And I have one last thing.
Sure.
In 2018, the Canadian government issued a $20 Falcon Lake incident coin. On one side, you see a profile of Elizabeth II, Queen Elizabeth. And on the other side, you see the UFO up in the sky with the grills pointing right toward Mr. Michalak, which has him laying on the ground, and it's in the air right next to the lake, and it's worth $20.
Worth $20?
Mm-hmm. It's a $20 coin.
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
So if anybody wants to know about this, I really highly recommend. I purchased it, and that's where I got a lot of my research from. This Chris Rutkowski book. When They Appeared, Falcon Lake, 1967, The Inside Story of a Close Encounter. The first chapters are a reprint, word for word, of the original book that Stefan put together, the pamphlet that Stefan put together. The next section is Stan's recollections of what had went on during that time. So it's more of like how it impacted the family, how it impacted him, Stan personally, as being bullied at school and having to struggle through it. And that the family was under scrutiny and was also under this derision from people in the neighborhood and in the community because of him claiming to have seen a UFO, and that it wasn't all,
and be pretty injured by it as well.
Yeah, and it wasn't all perfect for him. It was actually quite difficult for them. Yet Stefan stuck to his story all the way to his death.
Yeah, he passed away in 1999. Here's a little more on the Royal Canadian Mint. So in 2018, Royal Canadian Mint issued a $20 non-circulating commemorative silver coin featuring the Falcon Lake incident as part of Canada's Unexplained Phenomena series. The coin is shaped as an oval or egg. Goes on to say how I had already described that. The reverse shows the UFO in the sky with a grid pattern of dots on a silvery reflective skin. The UFO floats over Falcon Lake, with grass and trees in the background. The coin issued to commemorate the incident had a mintage of only 4,000. The original issue price was $129.95 Canadian, and it sold out quickly. With its popularity and low mintage, the Canada 2018 Falcon Lake $20 coin today trades for between $700 and $1,500.
Wow.
Yeah, pretty neat. It has 1 ounce of pure silver, and it glows in the dark. Forgot to mention that. It shows the beams coming down on him when you turn the lights up.
Radiation.
Yeah, maybe they got some of that. I guess that's why they use silver, because he was looking for silver.
Yeah.
And, a little bit of radiation making it glow in the dark. Why not?
That's a good choice, man. And
Yeah.
I guess his son Stan had a little bit of input into it. I don't know if Stefan did. Stefan may have passed away by that time, I think.
Oh, no, he died in 1999.
Right, at 88 or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, one other thing I think that's important also to bring up is his background. That's something we didn't do. So Stefan was a military police officer during the war. He was part of the regular army. He saw some pretty horrific stuff, according to his son. Had many close brushes with death. After the army had, I guess, disbanded or been taken out, Soviets had come in. You're more the history guy. But anyway, at one point he joins the United States Army as part of the occupational forces. And with a program with Canada, he was able to immigrate into Canada. And I think it took 9 years maybe to get his wife and kids there, if I remember correctly.
Now, when he fought in World War II, he was fighting, I guess the Free Poland Army, if anybody recalls. World War II officially began in September of 1939 when the Nazis invaded Poland and were defeated in a few weeks. And also of note, Russia invaded from the east at the same time that the Germans were fighting against them in the west. So Poland didn't have a chance as a small nation. But a lot of Polish soldiers and airmen in particular escaped and had fought with the British. There were several in the Battle of Britain. But I'm not sure what his circumstances were. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But probably, whenever the Soviets occupied Poland, things changed, and a lot of the Polish people didn't want to go back there because it fell under the communist regime.
Right, which why he immigrated to Canada, I guess. He lived with a Saskatchewan family working on the farm as a farmhand for a while, and while he was doing that, he went to get some training for industrial machinery, so that he could fix the farm tractors and such when they broke down. And he also took classes at a local college or something like that, L'Orange, to study geology. And that's where he got his love of geology. And he continued his studies on through the rest of his life. Though after the incident at Falcon Lake, his wife put the foot down and says, your rockhound days are over. You're done. No more of this stuff, man.
Yeah. All right. Got anything else for this case?
No, I think we've got enough in the pipe to make something of it.
Yeah, for sure. Well, before we go, I'd like to remind everyone to please rate and review the podcast. It helps other people find the show. Look for us on Facebook and Instagram. And be sure to check out our webpage, cosmicsponge.com. Next week, we're going back to the cryptid thing, and it's not really a cryptid. This animal did exist at one time, and that is the Tasmanian tiger, the thylacine. So there have been a lot of sightings of this creature that supposedly went extinct. So I want to take a look at that, the viability that this animal still exists in the wild. Next week, the Tasmanian tiger. And with that being said, this is Stephen Hawk signing out, and I'll see you next week.
This is Jimmy Coe telling you to keep your eyes to the skies and your feet on the ground. Unless, of course, the aliens offer you candy. That's all for this week's episode of Cosmic Sponge. Please don't forget to rate and review us wherever you listen. It helps others find the show. If you have any questions or have a story you'd like to share, you can contact us using our email account, firstcontact@cosmicsponge.com. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next week.